Esther. Welcome to my farm, the Hickories, here in Ridgefield, Connecticut. I was asked to talk a little bit about the history of this place. And so I guess for starters, it's important to note that this is a family farm. My grandparents came here in 1936. So the land was managed largely by my grandmother for most of the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, or 80s rather, and then by my dad for about 20 years, and now the land is managed by me. The transition for us to organics has a lot to do with the field in which we are standing. So this field, one of the things that's extraordinary about it is that it has been in continuous production for over 250 years. And that has, and the stone walls and the history of this place have been so inspiring for me. But it also means that the field has been in continuous production for 250 years, which is a long time. And the soil, when I took over the farm, really expressed that. It was, by all intents and purposes, tired. And so for me, 15 years ago, I set to work trying to enliven the soil and therefore make crops more nutritious and easier to grow. Now, a few things to note about this place. We are in Ridgefield, so many of our fields are very steep, and I certainly recognize with more dramatic rain events as part of our future, I wanted to make sure that we weren't eroding any of the soil that we have. So as you look across our field, one of the things to note is that in transitioning to organic, or in building this farm as an organic operation, the word organic was chosen by those guys in the Rodale Institute back in the day because organic means carbon. It is if you've taken organic chemistry, it is the chemistry of carbon. And so organic farming is really about carbon in soil and carbon farming. And when you're talking about carbon, you're talking about the living parts of soil and the soil biology. And so for me, organic farming, carbon farming, biological farming are all part of the same equation. And so in looking at this field, one of the things to note is how much is going on. A lot of farmers come here and are shocked by how weedy it is, which I love. Because part of what I say to them is that everything that is green and growing on this farm, whether it is a weed, whether it is a crop, it has a purpose and it is doing the work. And many of our aisles here this year, particularly as we face a changing climate, the aisles between the crops have gotten wider, and we use those aisles to build soil health. We plant a lot of cover crops in the aisles, clover, things like that, to be constantly building the soil as the crops are growing beside them, because in a couple of years we will transition and those aisles will become our main cropland and have the reserve built up in it to really feed the crops in the future. The other thing that is happening in all of our weeds is this is black-eyed Susan, a row that is growing specifically for beneficial insects. So if you come out here in the evening, you can see lacewings, a lot of bracketed wasps. Right now you'll see bumblebees. And these guys are part of our farm crew. They're going, probably the keystone piece of our operation is in really inviting back in the beneficial insects and the pollinators to ensure that we have a good harvest every year. So the biology in our farm starts with what's happening below the soil, and we pay a lot of attention to that given cover cropping and other myriad techniques we'll talk about during this tour. But also then the biology is what's happening above the ground, meaning the diversity of plant life, insect life, and bird life on our place. Why I brought you here is to talk a little bit about rotational grazing as another central piece of our operation. My farm is in Ridgefield, so we have all of these steep fields that are, if they were in annual vegetable production, we would risk eroding soil. And now, what you're looking at, this sort of denuded moonscape, is repair of this pasture, because after 12 or 10 years of sheep, we decided that we needed to reseed it. And we also wanted to reinvigorate the soil a little bit. And we decided to spend the first couple of months of the season with chickens on this pasture, and so they were adding nitrogen and eating out any of the pests and grubs that lived in the soil. Then at this point in the season, we have run this group of piglets through. They may come in for a cameo while I'm talking. But this group of piglets is now taking the pasture and turning it over, flipping the soil, all the while adding their contribution of nitrogen to the soil as well. And then in a couple of weeks, we will reseed this with fresh pasture seed for next year. So part of what my perspective has been as an organic grower, doing these transitions biologically has meant that I've had to slow time a little bit. I can't just come through this pasture quickly and spray for the pests, till it under, and reseed with a quick germinating grass. We decided to take the slow road and use chickens and a rotation of pigs before we bring back our rotation of sheep for the next couple of years. So as we talk about things that are central to our farming operation and soil health at our farm, one of the areas of our farm that is central to biological diversity is this little worm bin that was brought to us by another woman-owned business called Wiggle Room out of Bridgeport. And they build these small worm farms or worm bins. And if I can maybe bring this in a little closer, you can see that in this bin are billions of worms hard at work. And their guts are basically creating or amplifying the soil bacteria and fungi that will eventually go to work in our field. So the healthier our soils are, we know the healthier our food will be for us. And these worms, by creating castings, are used. We then actually use the castings from this worm bin to create a compost tea, or even the castings can be added directly to crops as we sow them in the field. And what that does is give all of our crops and all of our soil an instant recharge, a biological recharge, so that it has the strength to carry out exactly what we're asking of it. This came to our farm about 2 years ago, and so it's been part of my thinking in terms of the overall resilience of our farm. We have not yet been able to move away from tillage production here, so we still do plow fields when we need to. We still do use a rototiller, and we recognize that that sets us back in terms of our soil health. And so whenever we take 2 steps backwards, we know we need to take 3 steps forward, and that the work of these worms makes that possible for us, to constantly be regenerating and re-enlivening, literally, the soil that our crops are grown in. One thing to note about our farm business as well is that not pictured with me today in the video is Laura Mulligan and Jackie Slattery, 2 women who run this farm with me. And it's important for me, particularly as a woman-owned business, that from the get-go 15 years ago, 16 years ago, that we develop a feminist business model in which we have a much flatter organizational structure than typically I think you often see in business. And so Laura and Jackie and I really kind of share the management of this place, and they over the years have become more and more grounded and larger stakeholders in this operation. Their roles have changed, and my role has changed, particularly as in the last 5 years I started a family, and so I needed several times have had to transition the business and change. And I find that working amongst a group of women, that kind of flexibility was something I wanted to bake into this business from the beginning, that we all feel supported, and that we never feel like we have to sort of prove ourselves being women in this space. And I think that really does translate and transfer into how this farm is perceived in the world as a place that is more welcoming and that is representing a kind of equality that we look to engender in other parts of our lives.